The veterans' hall smelled of burnt coffee and old wood, the kind of place where time seemed to slow out of respect for the memories held inside its walls. Folding tables lined the room in uneven rows covered with handwritten signs, paper cups, and mismatched donation boxes. Near the entrance, a cardboard box sat beneath a marker-written label that read military memorabilia donations. An elderly woman stepped forward from the short line. She moved carefully, but not weakly. In her hands was a small cloth bundle folded more times than necessary, edges softened by age and use. She placed it gently on the table as if setting down something fragile. The cloth opened just enough to reveal what was inside. Tarnished medals, faded ribbons, bent service pins with dulled metal. 2 volunteers glanced down. One of them snorted under his breath. The other leaned closer and whispered, not quite quiet enough. "Those look like flea market junk." A soft chuckle followed. The woman heard it. Her eyes did not lift. She did not ask what they meant. She simply reached forward, gathered the cloth, and folded it back over the metal. Slow, the careful, precise. Her fingers were thin but steady, the kind of hands that had done the same motions thousands of times. Around her, the hole continued its low hum. Coffee cups clinked against saucers. Someone laughed near the back. A chair scraped across the floor. One of the volunteers cleared his throat. "You know," he said, forcing a polite tone. "You might want to keep those. They probably aren't worth anything." The woman looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once, no argument, no explanation. No visible hurt. She slid a bundle back toward the box. Anyway, for a brief second, the noise in the room felt heavier, thicker, like something unspoken had settled between the folding tables. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage, and tell us in the comments where are you watching from today. Her name was Eleanor Warren. Most people in town called her Ellie. She was 78 years old, a widow, and she lived alone in a small weathered house 3 blocks from Main Street. The porch paint had been peeling for so long that no one could remember what color it had originally been. A single set of wind chimes hung beside the front door, their soft clatter marking the passing of each afternoon breeze. Ellie rarely drove, not because she couldn't, because she didn't need to. She walked nearly everywhere, moving at a steady, unhurried pace that never quite matched the rush of the world around her. To most people, she blended into the sidewalks and storefront reflections like background scenery. Familiar, unremarkable, easy to overlook. In the town's collective memory, Eleanor Warren had always been the same woman, quiet, polite, invisible. If anyone was asked what Ellie did for a living, they would say she worked at the county hospital for decades as an administrative clerk, filing paperwork, answering phones, scheduling appointments. The kind of job no one ever thought twice about. A safe job, a simple job, a forgettable job. That version of Ellie fit neatly into the small mental box the town had created for her. She was the woman who donated canned soup and boxed pasta every month to the food pantry. The woman who wrote small checks to the high school band fundraiser. The woman who sat by herself at town picnics with a folded napkin on her lap and a paper plate balanced carefully on her knees. People nodded at her. People smiled. Very few people stopped. No one asked questions. Ellie never gave them a reason to. Her days followed a rhythm that rarely changed. She woke before sunrise, not by alarm, but by habit. She brewed a single cup of tea and sat at her kitchen table while steam rose slowly from the mug. No radio, no television. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic starting up beyond her street. When the morning paper arrived, she folded it with a light care, creasing each section cleanly before reading. When she finished, she folded it again, always the same way. Once a week, she wiped down the same wooden shelf in her living room. The shelf held nothing more than a framed photo of a younger man in civilian clothes, a small ceramic bird, and an old clock that no longer kept time. She dusted the empty space beside them, too, even though nothing had sat there for years. In the back of her bedroom closet, behind winter coats and folded sweaters, sat a pair of boots. They were polished, not new, not shiny, but clean. They had not been worn in decades. Beneath her bed rested an old green footlocker. The paint was chipped. The metal corners were dull. It stayed closed. Ellie never opened it. Not because she was afraid of what was inside, because she already knew. When she slept, she always lay on her left side. Always. She never shifted to her back. Never sprawled. Her bed was made every morning with sharp, tight hospital corners, the kind nurses used to be trained on long before fitted sheets became common. Most people would have assumed she picked up the habit working at the hospital. They would have been wrong. Ellie remembered faces more easily than names. She could recall the shape of a jawline, the way someone stood, the way their eyes moved when they were nervous. Names slipped away. Faces stayed. She remembered silence better than noise. Noise faded. Silence stayed with weight. She avoided mirrors when she could. Not out of vanity, not out of shame. She simply did not like being reminded of time or of the person she used to be. There was no bitterness in Eleanor Warren, no anger at the world, no resentment for being unseen. She did not believe she had been wronged. She did not believe she was owed anything. Her life, as she saw it, had unfolded the way it was supposed to. Some people carried their stories outward. Ellie carried hers inward like a carefully folded flag tucked away, protected, never displayed. She never corrected assumptions, never volunteered details, never hinted. When people talked about the military, she listened. When people argued about wars, she stayed quiet. When people praised heroes, she looked down at her hands. Not because she disagreed, not because she felt excluded, but because she knew how complicated the word hero truly was. At night, when the town settled into darkness, Ellie sometimes sat at her small kitchen table and rested her palms flat against the wood. She did not pray. She did not speak. She simply sat thinking about faces, thinking about voices, thinking about the ones who never made it home. There were moments, small and private, when her jaw tightened, when her breathing slowed. When something old stirred behind her eyes, but it never spilled over, never outward, never visible. By morning, she was once again just Eleanor Warren, the quiet woman who walked everywhere, the polite woman who donated canned food, the invisible woman with nothing remarkable about her. That was how the town saw her. That was how Ellie allowed herself to be seen. She never brings the medals for praise. She brings them because they no longer belong only to her. The morning after the donation drive, the Veterans Hall felt less like a place of honor and more like a back room full of clutter. The folding tables were still there, but the energy had shifted. Coffee was reheated instead of fresh. The chatter was thinner, less grateful, more casual. The kind of casual that comes when people think they're among friends, safe to speak without consequence. Behind the main table, two volunteers sorted through the memorabilia box. They handled framed photos with careful hands. They lifted a folded flag as if it were holy. But when Eleanor Warren's cloth bundle came into view, their movements changed. One of them held it between finger and thumb like it might leave grime behind. "Here's the rust pile," he said. The other volunteer laughed, short and sharp. "Probably stuff from a garage sale." He turned the medals over, squinting at the dull metal like it was a coin he couldn't recognize. "Think it's worth anything?" he asked, already grinning. "Scrap," the first one said. "Maybe $5, if that." The words landed like they belonged in a different room. Not here. Not under the faded banner that read, "We remember." Someone passing behind them heard and chimed in without looking up. Everybody claims they served. It wasn't even cruel in their minds. It was just an opinion, just a punchline, just another small-town certainty spoken aloud. Ellie wasn't there to hear it. But the sound of it traveled anyway because words always did. They left the cloth bundle on the table a moment longer than everything else, like it didn't deserve a final place yet. Then, as if to solve the problem by moving it out of sight, one volunteer slid it toward the end of the row, closer to the floor, closer to the wall. By lunchtime, the bundle had been pushed into a corner. Not thrown away, not removed, just quietly relocated to where forgotten things naturally went. By afternoon, town chatter had found it. It started small, the way gossip always did. A comment made to a friend in a parking lot. A laugh shared over a counter at the diner. A shrug delivered with the confidence of someone who believed being loud counted as being right. "You hear about those fake medals at the hall?" a woman asked near the post office. Her friend raised an eyebrow. "Fake? Some old lady dropped off a bunch of rusty junk," the woman said like she wanted attention. The friend smirked. "That's sad." It wasn't sympathy. It was judgment disguised as pity. At the coffee shop, it grew sharper. Ellie stood in line with her grocery list folded in her palm. She didn't take up space. She didn't shift impatiently. She waited the way she always waited, calm and silent, eyes on the menu board that hadn't changed in years. Two men sat at a small table near the window. One of them was a contractor from the next town over. Big hands, loud laugh, baseball cap pulled low. The other was a local who liked being seen as someone who knew things. The local leaned in and spoke like he was telling a story worth repeating. "Yeah, the volunteer said those medals looked like something out of a flea market," he said. The contractor snorted. "Bet she never wore a uniform a day in her life," the local nodded. "That's what I'm saying. Everybody claims they served." Ellie's name wasn't mentioned. Not yet. But she felt it anyway, like a cold draft finding its way through the smallest crack. The contractor sipped his coffee and glanced toward the door. "Real heroes don't hide," he said loud enough to be heard beyond his table. His voice carried. The words drifted across the shop like smoke. "Real heroes don't hide." Ellie stood still. She did not turn. She did not flinch. She stepped forward when the line moved, ordered her tea, paid with exact change, and left with her cup held carefully in both hands. Outside, the air was sharp and clean. But something inside her felt heavier. She walked the same route home, past the same storefronts, heard the same wind in the trees, yet the sounds that mattered were the ones still echoing behind her. Real heroes don't hide. In the grocery store later that week, the noise was ordinary. Shopping carts squeaked. A baby cried somewhere near the cereal aisle. A cashier called out a price. Ellie moved slowly through the produce section, selecting apples the way she always did, checking each one as if it mattered. Her list was short. Her life was quiet, but the world around her wasn't. Near the canned goods, two women stood by the soup shelves comparing labels and gossip with equal interest. "You saw that picture?" one asked. "What picture?" "The donation hall post." The first woman said, lowering her voice, "But not enough. The guy posted those medals and called it a rust pile." The second woman laughed. "No way." "Yes," the first said. "He said something like, somebody cleaned out Grandpa's junk drawer." They giggled the way people did when cruelty felt like community. Ellie's hand paused above the shelf. Her fingers hovered over a can of tomato soup. For a moment, she didn't move. Her eyes focused on nothing. And in that stillness, something old flickered behind her gaze. Snow. Not the gentle kind. The violent kind. The kind that erased distance and turned the world into a white wall. Darkness pressing in. The sound of radio attic cutting through the cold, broken and urgent. A voice clipped and controlled, saying numbers that mattered. Hands shaking over metal. Not from fear. From cold so deep it made the bones feel hollow. Ellie blinked once. The grocery store came back into focus. Bright lights, plastic packaging, people laughing. She took the can from the shelf and placed it in her basket. Her face remained calm. She moved forward down the next aisle away from the women. She never confronted them. Never asked what picture. Never said that was mine. That wasn't junk. Those weren't props. They were names. They were days that never ended. They were nights that still lived in her body. Ellie kept walking and the town kept talking. By Friday, the social media post had traveled farther than anyone expected. It had started with one volunteer snapping a quick photo on his phone. A close-up shot of tarnished medals spread across a table like scattered coins. The caption read something like, "Sorting donations, and found this rust pile," a laughing emoji. A second line, "Somebody's trying too hard." People reacted the way they always did online. A few laughing faces, a few jokes about pawn shops. Someone commented, "Probably fake." Someone else wrote, "Stolen valor is everywhere now." The words stacked on top of each other like bricks, building a wall around a story they had invented without proof. Ellie never saw the post. She didn't own a smartphone. She didn't scroll. She didn't argue, but she didn't need to see it for it to reach her. The woman at the food pantry mentioned it casually as Ellie dropped off her usual donation bag. The cashier at the hardware store offered a sympathetic smile that didn't belong. A neighbor's teenage son whispered to his friend as Ellie passed on the sidewalk, "Is that the lady with the fake medals?" That was the moment the town finally attached a name. Ellie did not slow down. Her posture stayed upright. Her steps stayed steady, but inside something tightened. A knot forming quietly, not from shame, but from an old kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes from being misunderstood and realizing you will not correct it. Because correcting it would require opening a door she had spent a lifetime keeping shut. At the donation hall the following week, Ellie returned for the community lunch they served every Saturday. She didn't come for attention. She came because it was a small habit, a small connection to the world, and she believed in supporting the hall even when it didn't support her. When she entered, conversations dipped, not fully, not dramatically, just enough to notice. A couple of volunteers glanced her way. One looked down quickly. Another forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ellie moved toward the corner where the donation boxes were stacked. And there it was, her cloth bundle, not in the main memorabilia box, not displayed with care, just shoved on a lower shelf near an old stack of flyers and a dusty container of donated books. It sat like something that didn't belong, like something that embarrassed them. Ellie looked at it for a long moment. Her face didn't change. Her breathing stayed slow. She reached down and touched the cloth lightly as if checking that it was still real. Then she straightened. Someone behind her cleared their throat. No one said her name. No one apologized. No one asked. The room filled with a strange quiet. Not respect. Not guilt. Just discomfort. As if they sensed they had crossed a line but didn't know how to step back. Ellie turned and walked toward the coffee table. She poured herself tea, sat alone like she always did. The laughter that had been easy earlier didn't return. It faded into whispers, then into silence, then into avoidance. People who once nodded at her now looked away. People who once smiled now acted busy. Ellie remained still in the middle of it all, her hands resting on her cup, her shoulders squared, her eyes forward. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have corrected them or walked away like she did? Ellie chose the same thing she had chosen her entire life. Silence. Not because she had nothing to say, because some truths were too heavy to toss into a room full of careless laughter. The town decided who Eleanor Warren was. They never asked who she had been. The shift did not happen all at once. There was no announcement, no dramatic moment where everyone suddenly realized they had made a mistake. It began with small disruptions in the story the town had already decided was true. On a quiet Wednesday afternoon, a man none of the volunteers recognized walked into the Veterans Hall. He was older, not elderly, but clearly past his prime. Gray hair cropped short, back straight in a way that didn't come from good posture alone. He wore a plain brown jacket and jeans. Nothing that suggested rank, branch, or affiliation. No hat, no patches, no visible signs that announced anything about who he was or what he had done. He moved slowly through the hall, reading the signs, nodding to himself as he went. When he reached the memorabilia table, he stopped. Not at the framed photos, not at the folded flags. He stopped at the corner shelf, at the cloth bundle. He crouched down slightly, careful with his knees. His fingers hovered over the fabric. He did not touch it right away. His brow furrowed. Something about the way he leaned closer was different from curiosity. It looked like recognition. One of the volunteers noticed him lingering. "Old junk," the volunteer said casually. "Probably not worth much." The man didn't respond. He reached out and gently pulled back one corner of the cloth. Just enough. His eyes moved across the metal, slow, focused. His mouth tightened, not in disgust, not in amusement, in concentration. After a few seconds, he covered the medals again. He stood and walked away without saying a word. The volunteer shrugged. The moment passed, but something had shifted. Later that same day, 2 volunteers were sorting other items near the main table. One picked up a ribbon bar from Ellie's bundle. She held it between her fingers, turning it side to side. "Have you ever seen this pattern before?" she asked. The other volunteer glanced at it. "I don't think so." The colors were muted. The edges worn, not arranged in the bright, symmetrical way most ceremonial ribbons were. They didn't look decorative. They looked utilitarian, like they had been assembled with purpose, not presentation. One of the volunteers noticed a tiny engraving on the back of a medal, so worn down it was barely legible. He squinted. "Looks like letters or maybe numbers." "Probably nothing," the first volunteer said. They set it back down. Neither of them realized how strange it was that no one could identify it. Ellie came in that afternoon to drop off a bag of donated socks. As she passed the table, she noticed the volunteers stacking medals into a shallow cardboard tray. They placed them face down, one on top of another. Ellie stopped. It was subtle, a half step. A small pause. She looked at the tray, then at the volunteer. "Never stack them face down," she said. Her voice was calm, not sharp. Not accusing. The volunteer blinked. "Why?" Ellie hesitated. "Just a fraction of a second. They scratch easier that way." She said it was true. But it wasn't the whole reason. The volunteer shrugged and flipped the medals over. "Didn't know that," he said. Ellie nodded. "She start."